Hello everyone, my name is Chris Titley and welcome to the FinTech Australia podcast. The FinTech Australia podcast takes listeners on a deep dive across the FinTech industry in Australia, focusing on the challenges, opportunities and big stories our community faces. Let's get to today's episode. Hi, it's Chris Titley here for the FinTech Australia podcast once again, and today we're joined by Hannah Glass, a Senior Associate at King & Wood Mallesons, or KWM as some people refer to. Hannah, you're in the Blockchain Technology, FinTech and Payments Division at KWM. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Not a problem at all. Hannah, let's talk about your role at KWM. I suppose something 5 or 10 years ago wouldn't have existed.
10 years ago, it certainly didn't exist, but 5 years ago it did, because I've been working in this space for quite a while now. So in terms of my role, I sit within the banking and finance team. And within that, I sit within the financial regulatory group, and we specialize in everything within that space: traditional financial services, banks and banking law, markets and financial markets, derivatives, and we bring all of that knowledge into this realm of blockchain payments and fintech. Now, in terms of my career, I started out in that traditional realm, but as I came across different areas of fintech, and it really was a nascent industry back then, so looking at things like equity crowdfunding and why is that not feasible, or was that not feasible within the existing regime at the time, regulatory sandboxes and what can be done to facilitate entry into this realm. Of course, payments and new mechanisms of payment, and including the settlement behind it. And then the topic of today, blockchain, or as it was then really Bitcoin, smart contracts, and Ethereum. And so I've sort of ridden this entire wave of fintech, and it's gone from being an interest, which I spent a lot of my spare time looking at, all the way through to now where it is the core practice that I now bring to the legal framework. And really, I take the same approach as I would when, or as anyone in the firm would when advising clients. We are lawyers first and foremost. We're not developers. And so we focus on what are the legal issues, how do we apply the existing law to the problems that are presented where people are really pushing the boundaries of the tech, and then of course the law goes with it, which we can go into in a bit more detail. But then also, what does that mean? And on the flip side, we've been involved in a lot of the policy work, which I can talk to as well. And that is where we find gaps in the law, where things don't quite work. How do we fix, either plug those holes or adapt the law to actually ensure that it can encompass what people are doing? Because the point of the law is it really must be a tool.
There's so much to unpack there. The first thing I want to unpack is at a high level around new technologies and the law and regulation, in the sense that I went through this in buy now pay later a few years ago around this new thing: is it credit, is it not, and all these things. And when you've got sort of an unprecedented new technology that's being adopted quickly by people, and there's no sort of rigorous or hard and fast law around that, from a lawyer point of view, how do you approach that in your head first and foremost to go, okay, I see what they're trying to do, but it seems a bit grey, or it seems a bit 50-50 on this?
Well, and I must admit, I've done some work in the buy now pay later space as well. And I think you always start with, what is the product itself? What are you actually doing? And if we look at buy now, pay later as an example, people didn't start with, is it credit, is it not? They said, I've created this new product. It allows people to pay in installments, but to receive the goods up front. Now, that is the commercial solution that's been developed. It's obviously something that has taken off as an alternative. The question then is, okay, well, what does it mean from a legal perspective, and how does that fit in? Now, most buy now, pay later products have relied on various exemptions under the National Consumer Credit Protection Act and the Australian and the actual code within that. So what it means then is not we're operating in a grey area or there's no law. It's actually there is existing law. We're working with existing exemptions, but we are relying on that when we use, because what we're doing is delivering a service using technology, which is more effective or has greater take up than, say, perhaps lay-by, which is the precursor to a lot of buy now, pay later. Now, if we're looking at, say, crypto, similar sort of idea applies. You don't say, well, the law says X, therefore it's outside, it doesn't exist. As people have been saying in this industry from the beginning, it's actually, what have you created? How does that fit? Where does it not fit? And then, to the extent that there might be exemptions, could they be relied on?
Yes, and then you've got things like DAOs and things that are sort of unregulated, like the whole term of unregulated regulation is sort of a bit of an oxymoron, but I feel like it's kind of needs to be closer together. Like the whole idea of Bitcoin for some is that it's off the grid and it's no one can scrape my bank account and this and that. But then you go, oh, well, we actually need laws to regulate it and probably from a, even country by country or whatever it might be. So, like, you're in a fascinating position to see so many different new ideas and so many entrepreneurial kind of creative ideas that come to life and that are mass adopted. When you added blockchain to your credibility in terms of your title with FinTech and payments, what excites you about the blockchain and the idea of, smart contracts, etc.?
So it's a great question, actually, because what really set me down the rabbit hole, so to speak, were smart contracts. So where my career originally, sort of the development of my career in relation to crypto started with Bitcoin as an alternative form of payment and having discussions with developers back in 2014 about why Bitcoin isn't money. And it doesn't meet the functional properties of money, which is an economic distinction, not a legal distinction. It just gets incorporated and given legal effect. So that was something which was an interest of mine and had led to some really fascinating discussions about, what are we doing here? How can you use Bitcoin to, say, buy beer at the pub, which is what people were trying to do back then, and came across all sorts of problems.
Or the famous pizza, whatever it was, so that pizza day that people talk about.
Exactly. And it still gets celebrated in May of every year.
There you go.
But if we're then moving into smart contracts, that's where the lawyer in me went, there is a greater potential here than just another way of trying to pay, but it's really clunky, takes a lot of time. There can be significant fees associated with that. Actually, particularly in Australia, I can just use the MPP. So smart contracts and the original smart contracts which were developed were two types. They were both on the Bitcoin blockchain. They were escrow arrangements and multi-signatory payment arrangements. And what they are is an escrow arrangement basically means I am going to make a payment at some time in the future, but I want to put that money into a certain place where it's safeguarded, where no one can access it until a certain time or until certain conditions have been met. Now, to date, the best way of using escrow is you actually transfer money into a lawyer's account, and then the lawyer releases it at a certain time. Or you transfer money into, say, a real estate agent's account, and it gets released once the sale of the property goes through. All of this really is dependent on humans, as in, take the example of the sale of property. You've signed the agreement, you've transferred the money into your real estate agent's account. It sits there from settlement until completion. At completion, i.e. you signed over, you've got the keys to the house, that money then goes from the buyer to the seller. And you know that you're going to get it as the seller because it's sitting in your real estate agent's account. The only condition on that is usually something to do with the time that has passed and perhaps that some form of mortgage has been secured. That's it. Pretty simple. Two conditions, but all require people to say, yes, these conditions have been met, and for the funds to go through. The idea behind an escrow within a smart contract is you can program those. So you don't rely on a human to say, yes, the time has been met, yes, the mortgage has been secured, funds flow. You actually have a system which takes in that information automatically and says, well, it's been 6 weeks or 6 months. That time has passed. Tick, condition 1. Then we go to condition 2. Has the funding been received? Tick, because we've automatically received a feed from the bank, funds flow through automatically. And that, for the lawyer in me, was great, because not only do we have the funds flow through automatically, but because we know that we have certainty of the conditions being met, we have certainty of the output being the funds will be received. Now, in a deal, when that's happening, what you usually do is you sit and you try and wait to see the funds arriving in a bank account.
Press refresh.
That is exactly what happens at the end of a deal. And frequently, the people who are hitting refresh are the lawyers, and you're paying for that time.
Yep. Yeah, right. Okay. And so the smart contract application use, which a lot of people talk about in regards to the future of blockchain, what are we waiting for as a mainstream moment, do you think? Are we waiting for, I mean, we've seen the ASX pull out after so many years in terms of their project to replace chess. We've seen a couple of other false starts, but there's got to be some applications brewing underneath the surface that will pop out and everyone goes, oh, wow, that's actually really, really good.
Well, I think the second point that you touched on there, which is the RBA and central bank digital currencies, there's been work undertaken internationally on central bank digital currencies since at least, I believe, 2015. So there's actually been a lot of thinking, whether it's in the UK, in Singapore, in Canada, and in Australia too. I think the first time the RBA mentioned it was around early 2015 here. And the whole idea behind that is, if we go back to that escrow arrangement, in the smart contract that we were looking at, you can't actually have a smart contract to release money unless that money is in the digital form. And yes, you could technically say money is already digital, which it is. It sits in bank accounts. We don't actually walk around with bars of gold.
I was thinking about that the other day, maybe getting like what it actually looked like to get paid in physical dollars again, like a paper bag. And you're like, wow, it'd probably stop you from spending a lot. You're like, holy, wow, there's $20 and I don't want to spend that. Whereas it's just numbers moving around. It's like, oh, tap and go, tap and go.
Oh, totally. I think our idea of what money is and how we use it and how we spend it, we could talk for hours on that as well. I mean, there's a significant decline in the use of checks. But if we look at where we're at now, if we say, okay, well, you could have money that exists electronically in a bank account, but in order to connect that up to the actual contract itself, those systems need to be interoperable. The idea behind a central bank digital currency and smart contracts is that the two are interoperable because the systems that they use work together. The reason why people say, well, we may need a blockchain or distributed ledger technology for that is because we don't necessarily want every single person to have access to all of that information at once, but they need to be able to check certain parts of that information to know that the conditions have been met. And what we then have is this concept of rivalrous data. What that means is
you've just actually named the new podcast episode that we're talking about, by the way, with that word.
Oh, really?
Because I'm always looking for a key word in the podcast to name an episode, and you've just nailed it. I don't know how to spell it. You're going to have to help me out.
We can get onto that afterwards. I'm not sure people want spelling lessons on the podcast. But in terms of what we're looking at here is it's the idea, and this is what blockchain actually brings to the table, that previously data could exist in multiple places at once and you don't change the nature of the original entry. So, for example, if you have an email and you send it out to 100 people, they can then send it out to 100 more people, and you can then also go back and send that out to 1,000 people. It doesn't change the fact that you still have that original email in your inbox, or actually probably replicated up to 8 different times on the servers that hold it. It also means that the last person who you've sent it to may not have any idea who you've sent it to previously, or that even you've sent it to anyone before. If we look at a blockchain-based system, what actually happens is the data that's recorded and records not only the fact that an email has been sent, or information has been sent, it records who it's been sent to, when it was sent, and then if it is on sent, that information is added to the chain too.
Yeah, wow.
And that is when we're talking about a consensus mechanism, what we're actually talking about is every single time there's a change in that data, the information goes through a mechanism by which everyone says, yes, that data can be moved. Yes, that data can be moved because it exists. And so we then are able to actually take that technology and, sorry, my computer's doing something strange.
That's okay. Keep going. You're live here, so we'll keep rolling. I'll tell a few jokes, but you can keep going.
Okay, we're back. So basically what happens then with these consensus mechanisms and rivalrous data is data can no longer exist in multiple instances at once with no record of the fact that it exists elsewhere. With the blockchain, that also means that instead of currently, if you're looking at data systems and we take a data systems approach, your data is recorded on, let's say, the cloud, which has one centralized server with multiple backups. In a blockchain-based system, every single computer that has that information has all information, and it is updated at the same time.
Wow, there you go. That's a really good explanation for someone out there that may not know the intricacies and delicacies or functionality of particular blockchain and smart contracts. One final question, which again we could possibly talk to for hours, is the recent events that's been happening with various cryptocurrency exchanges around the world, which to the general public, and I'm not talking about the people that may be more familiar with technology than you, but to the general public, it's sort of like this, oh, I always knew that. Oh, yeah, that's a bit, it didn't surprise me, or something along those lines. And that, for the people in the industry, how does that make you feel? And also, what do you think of this current situation?
I think the thing to remember here is it is not a failure of technology or cryptocurrency. What we're looking at here is actually, and it's not even a failure of centralization or decentralization. It's actually something that has happened in financial markets and financial systems several times before. And it's when people don't necessarily think about or take the right approach to control, management, compliance. We're looking at areas which are human in nature more than technological in nature. Now, that's not to talk about any particular entity, because ultimately I think there are a number of them out there. And if we look across the last year, there have been a number of different issues that have arisen. I think when we're looking at this, again, even within the industry, people are quick to say, this is a problem of centralization. But just because technology is decentralized does not mean there aren't central points of failure. Again, it comes down to the humans involved, because ultimately there's a human who's proposed code, which then gets accepted or declined by other people.
Yep.
So it is really about where do we go from here, and what does this teach us? It teaches us that there is more work to be done. It teaches us that we need to recognize that even in a decentralized world, there are still central points, and there will probably always be central points. It also teaches us, most likely, and this is a topic I'm incredibly passionate about, that the technology only gets us so far. It is absolutely phenomenally brilliant, and I think it does have great potential, as you can probably tell. But when we're actually looking at implementing solutions, the technology alone isn't enough. And if we go back to that smart contract discussion we were having earlier, we started off with saying, well, let's replace an escrow arrangement with a technological system. And that works, except for the fact that you say, well, let's go back to our property analogy. What if the bank has said, I'm really sorry, we've got an error in our systems, the money will flow tomorrow, or in a week's time, or perhaps it's taking you a little bit longer to get that financing together, and the bank who you'd originally spoken to said, look, I'm sorry, I'm no longer able to, so you're negotiating with another bank. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, no, sale of house doesn't go through, and then everyone walks away unhappy because you don't get your house as the purchaser, the seller doesn't get their money, we've got to go back and actually sell the whole thing again? Or do you say, actually, let's get the humans together and work out a solution? Same thing here. What you need to make sure is the technology gets you so far, and when everything is working perfectly, you can rely on that. But when it doesn't, you step out of the technology and you go into the legal structure, which is usually some sort of natural language part of the contract, which is designed to interact with, or should be designed to interact with, the smart coded form of the contract and through some sort of off-ramp, we then amend that natural language, which could very well be amended just by humans talking and then someone writing up one particular line and that being agreed to. And then you have an on-ramp back into the system and you say, we've amended this to say that settlement is in another 2 weeks.
Yep.
Okay. We go back into our coded format. Same thing here. What we're actually creating there is a smart legal contract which has both a technological and a legal architecture which are interoperable. We then need to see that same theory being implemented in crypto structures, whether they be DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations, whether they be exchanges, where they recognize that certain times everything will run according to the code, but sometimes we're going to need to step outside of that. And sometimes we're going to need to say, well, perhaps when we've got a lending pool, we need to have some sort of stop loss.
Yep.
We step out of that, we negotiate, we solve the problem, we come back in, so we don't have potentially the contagion that we're seeing now. But all of this can only be achieved when we take a more sophisticated approach to things like risk, compliance.
Governance.
We recognize that there are still humans involved, and ultimately that we may need to actually rely not just on the technology, but legal structures. And I'm not talking about regulation here. I'm actually talking about contracts and people setting that up at the same time to work interoperably with the actual technology.
Hannah, it's been a fascinating discussion. I really do thank you for your knowledge and insights and articulation in terms of the space that you're operating in, and I can definitely sense that energy and that passion around the new financial technology, being blockchain and fintech and payments. So I really do thank you for coming on to the FinTech Australia podcast. A great episode in terms of people that are unfamiliar with what is happening currently, as well as the application use and features. Really look forward to catching up in the future.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the FinTech Australia podcast. I'm your host, Chris Titley. The FinTech Australia podcast is a collaboration between FinTech Australia and Sub11. For more information about membership options, news and the events coming up, jump on to the FinTech Australia website. Have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.